These are our Frenzy Faves.
Today, our Frenzy Faves is a favorite Twilight Zone episode.
Ooh. So, Chris, tell us about the episode we're going to look at today.
Thanks, Prof. Today, we're going to look at Death's Head Revisited. This is episode 9 from season 3. It was directed by Don Medford. It was written by Rod Serling, and the original air date was November 10th, 1961. In our cast, we had Oscar Berge Jr. as Captain Lutze, a.k.a. Mr. Schmidt, Joseph Schildkraut as Alfred Becker, Karen Verne played the innkeeper, and we had a couple of other appearances. We had Robert Boone as the taxi driver and Ben Wright as the doctor. Professor, what happens in the episode Death's Head Revisited?
Well, a man, older man, not elderly, but, a middle-aged man, arrives at a small village in Germany in the 1950s. He goes to check in at a hotel, and the older woman behind the desk is startled to see him. It turns out he has an assumed name. He isn't Mr. Schmidt at all. He's really Captain Lutze, an ex-SS officer from the nearby Nazi concentration camp, Dachau. His plan is to take a visit to the camp that he remembers from the war. Yeah, go to your old wartime haunts. That's cool, right? Eesh, what a jerk. Anyway, he heads up to the camp and looks around the various rooms, remembering with delight all the awful things he did to the prisoners. He sees someone he recognizes, Alfred Becker, who he figures is like a maintenance person for the camp. It comes out that Lutze fled to South America after the war and changed his name. And they allude to the horrifying things that were done to the prisoners, and Lutze suggests they shouldn't worry about small things like that. The war is over, Predictably, it wasn't a small thing to Becker and the other prisoners. They say that they're going to do a courtroom scene to try Lutze. Ghostly figures appear, and the jury for Lutze Lutze just says he was following orders. It's like, yeah, that's not going to work. Lutze passes out, and when he awakens, Becker says that he was found guilty, and he's going to be punished. And Lutze laughs until he remembers that he killed Becker himself back in the day, and this must be ghostly retribution. His punishment is to feel the pain and terror that he caused the prisoners. TLDR, he is now a mess, and he's found by some medical people and taken to a medical institution. I really got an interesting vibe seeing the story about the Holocaust from the early 60s. It's a long time ago, and it was more fresh in people's minds. It's a very intense vibe. I mean, the interaction between Lutze and Becker were very powerful, as well as the hotel desk woman. The way that she handled it, she let us know that something nasty was up with old Mr. Schmidt. Chris, what are some of your thoughts about Death's Head Revisited?
Thanks, Prof. Let's get some trivia a little bit out of the way here. Oscar Berge would also appear in a Twilight Zone episode entitled The Rip Van Winkle Caper. And Joseph Schildkraut also appeared in an episode called The Trade-Ins, so we'll get that out of the way. I think he also appeared in a version of Diary of Anne Frank, and he was sort of well known to audiences of the time for that particular role. It is a really haunting episode, and as someone who visited Auschwitz as a youth, I could certainly give a testament that it is a very powerful, moving episode. And I think my visit and seeing this episode kind of enhances my feelings for this particular episode with respect to this. One other thought I had, Twilight Zone, not all of them, but there were, every perennially it would address episodes that addressed war. And I think this was sort of a theme, and this sort of hit home to Rod Serling with respect to that. He didn't want this. He didn't want the theme of war to be dismissed or lost on an audience or lost on a generation. I think his time in services really had an effect on him as a man and as a writer. You couldn't help but feel for what he went through, and I think that shows up in a lot of his writings and his themes with respect to this. On a personal note, I do have a grandmother who doesn't speak English, but she happened to watch this particular episode, and even though she couldn't understand the words in English, what was happening, she could see and understand the story in and of itself, even though she couldn't understand the language, and just to see it play out. It was curious to her and to me as a viewer why Lutza would go back, to do this. He was basically presumably free and clear in South America, but did he revel in what he did so much that he had to return? I think there had to be some risk involved, but if he didn't show up, we wouldn't have had the story. So there you are.
Yeah.
The only other thing I had in my notes, though, is just the haunting thing with the closing narration that Serling says, and I won't say it verbatim, but one of the characters says, "Well, why don't we tear this place down?" And then Serling says in his closing narration, they must remain standing. The Auschwitzes, the Belsons, everyone, they must remain standing, because if we tear them down, we lose our memory of what happened. And back then, to even be in recent memory, with the concentration camps, where we forget that we had people who lost their conscience, lost their mind, and if we lose that, we forget, we become the monsters with respect to that. And it is just so chilling. And I think of all the Twilight Zone closing narrations, this one really was the most haunting out of all of the episodes to me, in my opinion. Not to say that Serling got to be sentimental, not to say Serling had a sense of humor in some particular episodes, but this one really struck a nerve. And I think Serling really wanted to put a little bit of commentary here with respect to this. So for that, I really applaud him. And I think it's one of the more stronger episodes of Twilight Zone. And in as much too, one other last thing I forgot to mention in my other note is something of a history lesson, because I think when you teach history to a younger person or an audience, you get the dates, you get the core of what happened and a little bit of the why, but you really lose the human element of the things that happened and some of the atrocities, such as with the concentration camps here. And for me, this was something of a history lesson as well. When I first saw it, and then would later go to Auschwitz and later see this episode again, that you really get the emotional impact and weight with respect to this. So I think it makes me as a young person a little more curious about the war and things that happened and just how negative things are with respect to all the connotations and everything else. And you can't help but wonder what in the world happened as a populace in a globe, that the events that led up to this, and just to see it happen. This story had to be pretty fresh back when it originally aired, but I still think it holds up quite well. And for the emotional weight it provides, a fantastic, marvelous episode.
So this week's Frenzy Fave is Death's Head Revisited.
Just another Tom, Dick, or Dave. These are our friends